there'd be a greater reward, but no, that's what you want. Look for season 2 of Kenny versus Spenny on GSN, which I guess they used to call the Game Show Network, but now it's GSN. And check out their online interactive game, Versusville. It's called Versusville.
We have a 3D online first-person shooter game, and we're also on Showcase in Canada.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, hey, thanks so much for coming on.
We love you.
Thank you.
I'd be willing to bet that about 100% of my existing viewers are here because of some videos I made about a Canadian television show called Kenny vs. Spenny. This video is no different, except it's not really going to be about the show at all. This is really about a video game, based on the television show Kenny vs. Spenny. This is about a video game that appears to have been lost for over 15 years. This is about finding the lost city of Versusville. Here's a really quick recap for people unfamiliar with Kenny vs. Spenny. Kenny vs. Spenny, or KvS, is a Canadian comedy, reality, sitcom, gross-out game show. It's in the same vein as Tom Green or Jackass, ran for 6 seasons. For a time it had South Park's Matt Stone and Trey Parker as executive producers, and it even aired internationally on Comedy Central. The basic premise of the show is that 2 friends compete against each other every week, and at the end of the episode, the loser suffers a humiliation. Spenny is a straight-laced, neurotic nice guy, and Kenny is a devious conniver who often bends the show's rules to ensure a win. You can imagine how this competitive spirit could be neatly adapted into a video game, and in 2003 it was. The PC game Kenny vs. Spenny Versusville went into production. I want to put the show's popularity in context to emphasize how odd it is that its video game is now gone. Even before its peak, when it was only circulated across a handful of region-exclusive channels and the Game Show Network, the show already had over 1 million viewers every week. It also saw a lot of attention on the internet via torrents and on early YouTube. Right now, Kenny and Spenny's YouTube channels together total over 120 million views, not including the millions of views on other third-party uploads. I've found that the show is pretty well known in Canada, but I'm an American, so I want to try and make a comparison for those unfamiliar with KvS. Imagine that there was a video game made based on the show Fear Factor, back in Joe Rogan's early days, but that it was now lost to time. It would be really strange that a game from an official property so well known could just disappear, wouldn't it? That may seem like a bit of an oddball example, but Fear Factor Unleashed was actually the last title released by DC Studios before this now lost game, Versusville. For reference, that was in 2004, the same year as World of Warcraft, Halo 2, and Half-Life 2. It's worth pointing out that Versusville itself isn't just lost, but any substantive information about it has been missing as well. You have to do some real digging to understand what the gameplay was like, and even deep digging will get you barely anywhere as far as actual documentation or visuals. There are no videos of gameplay, no trailers, no demos. There's confusion about what was actually included in the game or planned to be included. Even though the topic of lost media is pretty popular, there is very little discussion of Versusville, if any. For people not involved in the lost media world, there are a lot of reasons why things can go missing. A lot of pieces of lost media were aired once but never got an official release, or they're half-finished works that were never distributed in the first place. There's a number of examples of this second thing. Pieces of lost media that people chase down only to learn that it was only ever a half-baked concept anyway and there's nothing actually to find. What we'll learn is that Versusville is none of these things. In general, the discussion of lost media is much more about the fact that it's lost and not so much the content of what's lost. So, regardless of what Kenny vs. Spenny might mean to you, just know that it had its own video game, it was developed to completion by a group of people, it was distributed for free on the internet, and based on a show with a large cult following. It was done, people played it, and now it's just gone. So this is where the trail begins. Though the game was released early on in the television show's run, the show only has a single reference to its game, Versusville, and it's a poster that hangs in the back corner of the second Kenny vs. Spenny house. The first time you see it in the show is in Season 4, Episode 1, as Spenny walks into the house to find Kenny trying to seduce him. You can get a much better look at it in Who Do Disabled People Like More, as the closest that anyone ever comes to actually acknowledging Versusville in the show is when Kenny needs to dispose of the poster as evidence of his identity. If you're curious about what Versusville is from here, you do what anyone would do and you Google it. You'll find a good summary of the game on the Breakthrough Entertainment website, which must have once been a hub for the game. You can also find some third-party resources on Giant Bomb and Moby Games. There's a PDF from 2003 that announces that the game had been funded, a blog from 2005 that mentions the game, and a lone IMDb comment from 2010 asking for it. There's also a pile of modern posts on Reddit inquiring about the current fate of the game, and a recent YouTube video that goes over this briefly. That's kind of all you'll see on the surface. The Breakthrough Entertainment website is a good primary source, but it ultimately tells us very little. The game has 1. A set of 4 game modes represented as the fictional city of Versusville, 3D environments, realistic textures, single and multiplayer modes, and some kind of chat or communications. The Giant Bomb and Moby Game sites reveal the 4 game modes in specific. Residence Evil, a tutorial level that may be a combination of the other modes. Wasteball, some kind of shooter. Cart Dart, some kind of kart racer. And Grave Rave, some kind of shooter or something. It's worth noting that other than maybe Residence Evil, there isn't much parity at all between the premise of these games and what actually happens in the Kenny vs. Spenny show. Now, the blog is interesting because it's written by a random person who claims to have actually played the game. This is the first indication that, contrary to what some believe, the game was actually completed, distributed, and playable. Both the blog and the funding document point to a now-defunct CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Channel, website. Thankfully, that page has been archived, and if you look back at the 2004-2005 era, you'll find the most official and publicly available Versusville information that we have today. The website looks a lot like the one that's still up at kennyversusspenny.tv, but with an extra page for Versusville. There's a few things we gain from here. 2 screenshots, which is our first look at the game. They are pathetically tiny, but show a character, likely Kenny or Spenny, in an indoor level, and another character in an outdoor level. The images for the other games didn't seem to have been archived. We also get download links, which don't function, but do give us file names and file sizes. A scoreboard with names of people that have presumably played the game, a contact address, and, I think most interestingly, a README with instructions for the game. The README has a great introduction for the characters themselves. Kenny and Spenny are 2 best friends who compete against each other. Their competitions are ridiculous, immature, and totally intense. Kenny, a witty wisecracker and brilliant schemer. Kenny's a goofball looking for a shortcut. He loves to humiliate Spenny and will do anything to win. Spenny, a stressed-out, neurotic, short-fused adult type who believes in preparation and hard work. He's responsible, often angry, introspective, paranoid, and ethical. I wrote my own bios earlier in the video without even looking at this README, I promise. The descriptions are just that spot on. The rest of the document is pretty bare. It goes over a few more logistical areas and lists the controls, which paint a picture of how the game worked. It's pretty standard. This is basically as far as I had got. I had done enough digging that I felt like I must have been close to something, and yet there was nothing, and it didn't feel like I had any good leads left either. There are no live download links, and no footage or screenshots from players of the game. The material on this page is the most substantive thing we would have for a long time, and I had run out of the obvious options. On December 28, 2020, I was contacted by a Kenny vs. Spenny fan named John. This was before I had made any videos about the show and was just participating as a member of the Kenny vs. Spenny subreddit Discord. John asked me if I had made any good progress looking for Versusville. I caught him up with everything I've mentioned so far and even 2 new things. That there were some unlisted YouTube videos on Kenny's channel that show work-in-progress Versusville models, and an archived blog of Kenny's that includes a now-dead download link. John caught me up with what he had worked on. He had already come through everything I did and then some. He tried to find if Versusville had been tucked away in any existing archives that he could think of. He looked on archive.org, My Abandonware, in open website directories, old first-person shooter archives, Russian and Italian abandonware sites. He searched for different variations on Versusville and for specific files with the names that you find on the CBC website. He even scrubbed through old CBC commercials from 2004 to 2005 to see if it was ever mentioned, but it wasn't. There was one good substantive find, which was an old Kenny vs. Spenny Pro Boards forum that had a thread on Versusville from the early thousands. People talked about the game and even shared a link to a torrent. Unfortunately, this torrent is no longer seeded, and it seems it would be impossible to extract the game from it. More than this, John told me that he started reaching out to different people and companies. We know from the Breakthrough website that Versusville was developed by DC Studios, produced with the CBC, and funded by Telefilm Canada and the Bell Broadcast Fund. John had also reached out to the address that was on the archived CBC site with no response. He even reached out to Kenny himself with no response. His most fruitful contact had come in November, about a month prior, after he'd reached out to Mark Greenshields, the CEO of DC Studios. The studio itself had since closed, but Mark was still in the business and the two began to talk. John had reached out to some other folks who worked on the game and they would eventually point back to Mark too, so this seemed like a big win. Mark is very passionate about game development and is the type of person to hoard old information from his previous projects. I was really impressed by the fact that we had contact with the head guy of all people behind Versusville. He didn't remember too much about the project, but he was open to helping us. Mark explained that DC Studios worked on the game with another company called Dream Mechanics. There's little we know about them other than that they were eventually acquired by DC Studios. Mark also told John that he didn't have any backups on hand, but offered to search through some old hard drives for any sign of Versusville. At this point, I was very glad that John had involved me in the hunt, a little bit jealous that he'd ultimately be the one responsible for finding the game, and eager for Mark to find the thing at all. But for the first time, I thought, wow, we are really going to have this game. Meanwhile, in early December, a live stream with Kenny and Spenny was announced for New Year's Eve. They were going to take fan questions, and we were determined to get Kenny or Spenny to acknowledge the project. While playing the waiting game, I laid out a systematic way to think about our search. There were 4 distinct tracks that could lead us to Versusville. The first and most obvious track is to find Versusville on an existing archive. These would be static sites that house old or obscure games and files, or dedicated downloads that are still live today. Maybe the game is just living out there somewhere, sitting, waiting to be found. We had a few dead ends on this track so far. The original CBC website is now gone, as is its download link. The torrent that once existed for the game is no longer being seeded. The send space link that Kenny had used to post Versusville to his blog has died. And none of the FPS or video game archives list Versusville. The second track would be to find some more dynamic archives, the people who actually once played the game. None of the folks on Reddit that claim to have played the game or known someone who played the game have the game. However, the author of this 15-year-old blog post played it, and the folks on the leaderboard played it, and we can presume that some of the people in this message board played it. Unfortunately, this is a very hard track to go down. Many of these players left their mark via aliases that are not very distinctive. It is exceedingly unlikely that we will be able to reach out to Blarg, Jason, Simon, or Guest. The third track has us going directly to the source and talking to the developers. So far, this has been the most lucrative, with John being able to talk to the CEO of the dev studio that actually produced Versusville. While there are many other designers, artists, and programmers that worked on the game, Mark is our bullseye. If even just one of these people, who were once very close to the game, had that single 85 megabyte file, we would have the game. The final and narrowest track is Kenny. He is clearly dedicated to his craft, has his own archive of projects that he's worked on, and creatively, he is the progenitor of the whole project. If there's one person that couldn't possibly have no information, it's Kenny. If you think about it comprehensively, the thing or person that gets us Versusville will have to meet the following criteria. 1, they once had the game. If they're going to give us the game, they will have had to have it at some point. 2, they like to keep things. If they're going to give us the game, they will likely have kept it for 10 to 15 years. 3, they're still around. If they're going to give us the game, they have to be around to give us the game. So consider this Venn diagram. I'm around and like to keep stuff, but never knew Versusville existed until it was too late, so I live here. Kenny definitely had the game, and I know he likes to keep stuff, but he's notoriously laid back and occasionally laconic, so I don't consider him engaged at this point. Right now, Mark is the only person known to fit all 3 criteria. It's possible for people to move around in the diagram too. For example, if I ever get the game, I'll move to the center. If we're able to get in touch with Kenny, he would move into the middle as well. As we move down these tracks, we're trying to find where people live in the diagram, with the center being our most promising leads. At the moment, the archive track is essentially stalled to a complete halt. The player track is untraveled, but lacks promise. The development track has some good motion, but the speed is tied to Mark's ability to dig through his backups. The Kenny track is a total wild card, for now.
Let's rock the house, girls.
Chaos!
Prior to New Year's Eve 2020, Kenny and Spenny announced a paid livestream for fans, ingeniously titled Jew Year's Heave. An effort was made to source questions from fans, so John and I coordinated to get Kenny or Spenny to acknowledge Versusville. On the day of the stream, the live chat was utter chaos and there were some technical issues that impacted the audio.
Oh, now it's better. Whatever you did is better. All right, hey! We did it!
It was absolutely maddening, as typing into the chat was like yelling into the void, and even if they read your comment and responded, you maybe wouldn't have heard it anyway. And yet, we were persistent, and Spenny picked up our message.
Give me a question.
Okay, so one of the biggest questions is, whatever happened to the KvS game, the Versusville?
Kenny might know. Whatever happened to Versusville?
I haven't. I could throw it to somebody if they want to do it.
We knew Kenny used Reddit occasionally, so we very quickly went to the r/Kenny versus Spenny subreddit to give him a place to get in touch with us and hand over the game. It took him a few days and he didn't know how to do it at first, but Kenny eventually sent over his file. For the second time, I thought, wow, we're really going to have this game. Taking a look at it, the file's the right size, which was a good sign. Once opened, the first thing that struck me was that what Kenny had was from the defunct Demonoid torrent. That wasn't necessarily bad, but it did mean that it wasn't an old file that Kenny had held onto. It was something he himself must have tried to find and save once it was archived in the torrent. Running the file does nothing. In fact, when you open it in an editor, you realize that the file is empty. I don't know enough about torrents to say for sure, but it seems like Kenny had started the torrent and gotten far enough to establish the file structure, but nothing was ever actually downloaded. His copy was hollow. This also implied that Kenny himself had tried and failed to archive the game, which doesn't bode well for the Kenny track. Meanwhile, I started to polish some writing I was doing on the show Kenny vs. Spenny and decided to record, edit, and publish them as videos on YouTube. While we waited for Mark to get back to us about his backups, I decided to chase down the author of the blog that mentions playing Versusville in 2004. This is someone who definitely had the game, and if I could get in contact with them, it's possible they still have it. Of all the people we know to have played the game, they definitely left the biggest footprint, but our standards are pretty low. Tracking down people is a little easier than tracking down files. The one big lead here is the blog itself. It's a series of posts that span a few months about next to nothing at all. The author goes by the name Blackadder, who describes the blog as the life and times of an extremely bored insano. There are occasional stories, tips, and musings. Last night in a dream. Actually, it wasn't quite a dream. More of a thought I had while I was sleeping. Anyway, I thought of a new euphemism for the word poop. Pool monster. It applies really well if someone has actually pooped in a swimming pool, or even funnier, a pool table. The first thing you'd want to do is search their name, but I knew this would just get me links to the British show Blackadder. We need something more distinctive than that. You can look into their author's profile, which gives some biographical information, however, some of it's obviously a joke, so it's hard to know what information you can trust. So this is still not very distinctive. We have their AIM screen name, which is distinctive as it's bound to be unique, and it's possible they reuse it elsewhere. Searching that led me to an artist that makes content for Warhammer 40k, who lives in Europe and was very confused when I asked them about a video game based on a Canadian comedy show. This was not our guy. The easy route ended up being a dead end, so if I was going to figure out who this person was, I'd have to actually dig into the blog itself. One thing I noticed is that it was actually intertwined with someone else's blog, and what we were seeing was two friends exploring the novelty of putting nonsense out onto the internet. I don't think they had any idea that more than a decade later, some creep was going to be picking over every word of it in hopes of finding out who they were for the sake of a dumb game. A random thing crossed my mind. Even if I do find these people, will they want to talk to me? Are they even still alive? When you're looking at something like this, you take for granted the time difference. You're traveling back in time to read these posts, but even if I knew exactly who they were, could they still meet me here in the future? My guess in this case was, yes, they are still around, because you can kind of tell from the content of the blogs that these are teenagers. One of them is under 18/21, and the other has an interview later at Walmart. So these people are probably now in their 30s. If I find them, will they just think I'm spam? I read each inane post of both blogs a few times over. You can't find out much of anything, and I know it's a cliche, but I really was just about to give up on this. One thing I noticed though, most of these posts on the two blogs, if they had comments at all, only had comments from the author or the friend. Well, this was until spam bots found the blogs and started advertising the automotive lending industry in the comments. Anyone that's been around the internet for long enough has become accustomed to seeing this on articles, blogs, forums, or even your email. And my eye can discern very quickly whether a post is written sincerely or by a bot. However, something I hadn't noticed previously is that on Blackadder's friend's blog, Blackadder had left a comment jokingly posing as a bot that I had missed because in my haste I had written it off as an actual bot comment. The only really interesting thing about his comment was that it was made by Blackadder on a totally different blog than the first, which had become a dead end. That gave me a new lead on the trail, and while the third blog is very sparse, it did give me the breakthrough I needed. Blackadder wrote, "Before I leave, I want to leave you, all 0 of you, with this." I don't fault him for assuming this would be left for nobody, but he was wrong. This was a link to an image hosted on his photo bucket, which is also now defunct, that contained a specific enough permutation of his name, Blackadder's S2. This is still not super distinctive, but at least now distinguishes this random internet person from the television show, which was good. I'm not 100% sure I'm going down the right path, but I see a YTMND profile with the same username, which is very distinctive. For those unfamiliar with YTMND, it was a website from the early-ish internet that helped people build and share memes, before they were called memes. You could easily put up a page that would consist of just 2 things, an image, sometimes tiled, sometimes animated, and a piece of audio. These would loop and act as a cobbled together pre-YouTube video that you'd send to your friends. I'm not saying this in past tense because the site is gone, just because it's hardly relevant anymore. Among some of the most famous pages on YTMND are a Sean Connery page that gave the website its name,
"You're the man now, dog. You're the man now, dog."
The Picard song, and this audio over Adam West's Batman. Bear with me for a little bit as I attempt to summarize a fantastic article from BusinessInsider that I've put in the description of this video. The story is going to take a little bit of a detour. The year is 1997, and a writer for Backwoods Home magazine had some extra space to fill in their classified ads. He decided to insert his own ad as an innocent joke. It read, "Wanted. Somebody to go back in time with me. This is not a joke. You'll get paid after we get back. Must bring your own weapons. Safety not guaranteed. I have only done this once before." The ad becomes mildly famous. It was discussed on the popular radio show Car Talk. Jay Leno read it during one of his segments on The Tonight Show, and the magazine got lots of mail inquiring about the time traveler. The year is 2005. A page published to YTMND highlights the ad, implicates a random mulleted man as the author, and plays some 80s montage music. This, titled Safety Not Guaranteed, becomes one of the most viewed pages on YTMND, and many popular spin-offs are created. The year is 2017. Despite the success of Jurassic World, director Colin Trevorrow is removed from the helm of the 9th Star Wars film. The year is 2008. Known for his delivery of the line, "In a world," iconic trailer voiceover artist Don LaFontaine dies, and with him dies our appetite for movie trailer voiceover narration. The year is 2012. A film, Safety Not Guaranteed, the story of a man investigating a cryptic classified ad, is released in theaters. The year is 2010. Screenwriter Derek Connolly sees a variant of the Safety Not Guaranteed ad on YTMND with Don LaFontaine's voiceover and is inspired to write a film. Colin Trevorrow is signed on to direct it as his first feature. The year is 2006. With YTMND at its peak, a teenager going by the name Blackadder2 sees the Safety Not Guaranteed pages and thinks the ad would sound great if read by legendary voiceover artist Don LaFontaine. He has the guts to write LaFontaine an email out of nowhere, asking simply if he would record a reading of it. I wonder if Blackadder worried about whether LaFontaine was still around. I wonder if LaFontaine had thought the email would be spam.
I think if
you have something that is of value to people, there's no reason not to share it. I get a lot of calls from, a lot of things on my web mail, saying, would you do my voicemail for me? If I have the time, I'll knock it off and send it to him.
He responded with a recording. The version of Safety Not Guaranteed with LaFontaine's narration becomes one of the most popular variations on the original ad.
Wanted somebody to go back in time with me. This is not a joke. You'll get paid after we return. Must bring your own weapons. Safety not guaranteed. I have only done this once before.
Blackadder's footprint is large enough for me to find his Reddit account. I send it a simple message. I'm looking for someone matching your description. Can we talk? The player's track was now scraping slowly along, waiting for Blackadder to get back to me. Meanwhile, Kenny posts to my YouTube channel that he likes my videos. Because YouTube is a mess, it never notifies me of this, and I reach out to Kenny weeks later to establish communication. He moves to the center of the diagram. In early March, the CBC finally responded to John's inquiry, telling him that no, they did not have the game. I didn't see the email personally, but I imagine they had no idea what the hell he was talking about. While technically bad news, it was overshadowed by some incredible news. Mark had found his DC Studios backups. He was a bit too busy to hand them over right then, but he said that what he had found was on a DVD. Specifically, he wrote that it was a 35.g RAR archive. At this point, we had a group of 3 of us coordinating our hunt in secret. Me, John, and Carson, a game dev himself who I mentioned in my previous Lost Media video as the person archiving KvS music. There was some debate in our group about what exactly Mark meant in his email. What's a 35.g RAR archive? Was he saying that the thing he has is 35 gigabytes? Is that a typo? Is that 35 gigabytes compressed? Was it all Versusville? We knew for sure that we were looking for a simple 85 megabyte exe, so this seemed like more than we bargained for. I don't think a DVD from 2005 could even fit anything near 35 gigabytes on it. It didn't seem right, but we were probably just overanalyzing things. Again, we waited. It was another week before Mark was able to send over his backup. For the 3rd time, I thought, wow, we're really going to have this game. When we cracked open Mark's backup, the file was indeed big. Very big. Too big. I think that throughout the search, we fantasized most about finally finding Versusville and being able to goof around in the early thousands 3D environments. I wanted to shoot Spenny with a waste-ball gun, whatever that meant. I wanted to dart in a cart. What we got was Versusville, I guess technically. They were archives of archives, iterations upon iterations of different components of Versusville. Volume-wise, we got Versusville 100 times over, and yet there was nothing playable here. This was some kind of source backup that Mark had as the owner of the dev studio. So our work wasn't done, but the good news was that we had a comprehensive look at the guts of the game that was deeper than if we had just found the EXE. And now, not only do we finally have material of what some things looked like, but by going through the backups, we could actually see Versusville being built. One of the most interesting treasures in the trove was a design specification doc that laid out how every aspect of Versusville should work, what the different features were, and the design philosophy behind the game. Here are some highlights. Versusville would contain voices for Kenny and Spenny, with Kenny's alternate voice being a action movie actor voice and Spenny being a serious older man voice. You would have to register before playing the game. This might mean, because the servers are long dead, the game may not be playable at all unless this check could be bypassed. We have a beautiful piece of concept art depicting a cartoonish Versusville. Obtaining a high score in Versusville would make you eligible for a contest which would let you meet Kenny and Spenny and give them advice on a competition of the TV show. Kenny and Spenny will comment on how well or poorly you do. Comments include, "You reek, loser," "Papa likes," and "You're tarded." Idle animations would show the player picking their nose, scratching their butt, burping, picking their ears, and flinging their boogers/earwax. There are a ton of funny little details in the design doc that I won't go over here. At this point, it certainly felt like we had every little thing except an actually functional copy of the game. There were a lot of ideas and pieces, but few, if any, completed pictures. Some of the files in Mark's backup had formats that we didn't recognize and weren't sure how to properly open. We talked about how we might be able to somehow recompile Mark's backup into the finished game. We brought another member of the KvS community, Metalock, into the group, as he had been trying to find Versusville himself and also had a background in game dev. The developer track had covered a lot of distance, but we couldn't tell if we had arrived yet. Without many other options, we started to pick apart Mark's backup. It started to seem that we didn't have everything necessary to rebuild this game. There were manifests that referenced sounds and materials that weren't in the backup, and even if you were to replace those, it appeared that the core engine of the game was missing as well. I'm not going to summarize all of this here because not only is it sort of boring, but I also don't really understand it all myself. But basically, Versusville was created on the Trimorph engine, and even though we had a ton of the ancillary pieces, we didn't have that. However, we were able to find that some of DC Studios' other projects were also created with Trimorph, and for the most part, those games were still around. Two examples released by DC Studios were the Bratz game in 2002 and the Winx Club game in 2006. While it wasn't technically developed by DC Studios, the game Alias Underground was released immediately preceding Versusville by Dream Mechanics, the company that DC Studios later acquired. I smiled when I saw a speedrun of an Alias Underground mission on YouTube because the uploader notes that they've never seen someone play the game. This thing probably only barely survived being lost as well, and is the closest relative to Versusville we have. Lastly, there are some references to golf in Versusville's files. They're pretty rare, so they're either a vestige of some other game or perhaps a cut game mode from within Versusville. I don't know how golf would have anything to do with Kenny vs. Spenny, but I didn't know how Wasteball or a Grave Rave did either. As the other guys discussed how to extract an engine or binaries from these other games, I just sort of pouted in the corner at how labyrinthine this all seemed, just to get a stupid simple 85 megabyte exe. One of the other things we were able to get out of Mark's backups were names of people who worked on the game, because now we had things like to-do lists and internal notes to work from. John had been reaching out to folks who we could guess worked at DC Studios while Versusville was being developed, but now we knew exactly who they were, what they were working on, and when. He also now had two questions for them. Do you have the game, and if not, do you know how to put it back together? For the most part, the answers were no and no. He did get something valuable from an artist, Tina, who worked on the game. She still had some pictures from Versusville, maybe from a portfolio, and shared them with John. As I mentioned before, Mark sent us plenty of files, but they were often theoretical, very scattered, and occasionally in formats we didn't understand. These pictures from Tina were nice, neat, and easily consumable for those of us that just wanted to look at a finished video game. You can see what looks like the arena for Grave Rave, as well as props from that game, and a screenshot of the first-person perspective. As well, a colorful rendering of the Resident Evil house, with a full-size photo of that tiny thumbnail from the archived CBC site. Here's Wasteball, which looks to be taking place in a warehouse. I believe these are guns from that game filled with neon green waste. This is the Cart Dart track. It's about what you'd expect. This was nice and a welcome bit of encouragement. Meanwhile, I finally got a reply from Blackadder. He was a little confused about my message, but kind. And no, he didn't have the game anymore. It's too bad because that would have made the story more fun. The former player track, which showed little promise previously, looked no more promising now. Still, our standards were low and options were few, so we looked into the old ProBoards forum. It was a total shot in the dark, but there is a Kenny vs. Spenny fan forum that was lightly used about a decade ago. It had one thread about Versusville where some users shared the torrent that once hosted the game. The torrent was dead, and the forum hadn't been touched for a long while, but we had the usernames of the people who were participating in that specific thread, as well as the forum as a whole. These usernames were also fairly distinct, and some of their profiles even had emails attached. John had a good idea. If he could register and post to the thread, would it notify everyone, even those without public emails, that he did it? And if someone in the thread had the game and held on to it, and got that email, would they come to our rescue? Unfortunately, the answer was no. He left a post anyway, and we took down some usernames that were distinctive enough that we might be able to track down later. We were quickly exhausting all of our options. Mark and the DC Studios folks didn't seem to have the finished copy. We couldn't find any players around that took it seriously enough to keep it. Kenny's copy was a dud, and Versusville wasn't just sitting around anywhere that we could think of. As we were kinda stuck, we revisited the leaderboard. If the design doc is right, you register your name before playing, then your scores are tracked and automatically sent to the CBC site. Similar to the pro boards, we comb the leaderboards for distinctive usernames in hopes of tracking these people down and reaching out to them at some point in the future. A month passes, and very little is happening. John informs us that a Spanish game cracking group has found a previously lost game called Disney Mini Golf. This is the golf game that Mark's backup alludes to and DC Studios worked on. It had become lost due to the fact that it was available only on an online Disney download service that went down in 2008. And yet, Disney Mini Golf was found. Of all things, Disney Mini Golf. Another month passes. I hear rumors that Kenny and Spenny are going to tour the east coast of the US. Other than as just a fan, I'd love to talk to them about Versusville. On August 9th, John has a thought. In focusing on the CBC, Breakthrough Entertainment, and DC Studios, he neglected to contact the companies that helped fund the game, the Telefilm Canada New Media Fund and the Bell Broadcast and New Media Fund. These seemed like weird leads to follow because these are just companies that give money to other companies and they wouldn't know anything specific about Versusville. Surely if the people who spent years of their lives working on the game didn't know, neither would these funding companies. Regardless, he reached out. The Bell Fund had nothing, and recommended we reach out to the production companies / copyright holders / developers. Telefilm said something similar, but they added something absolutely crucial. Because Versusville technically got funding from the Canadian government, there were requirements that it be logged in a Canadian government archive. The next day I asked John how he arrived at this epiphany in the first place. He says, "Literally the other day when I was like, I feel like we've done everything, I went back to where it started, the Breakthrough page. Co-developed by Breakthrough New Media and DC Studios. Produced in association with CBC Television. Produced with the generous support of the Telefilm Canada New Media Fund and the Bell Broadcast and New Media Fund. I was ignoring the simple solution this whole time. He didn't know about the requirement, but it was suggested to him and they linked to the archives. And sure enough, tucked away is item number 213860. The page is completely unassuming. In fact, when you load it, it says absolutely nothing about Kenny vs. Spenny or Versusville until you expand to this box. The entry describes a single moving image from 2004 on a CD-ROM. Ascension consists of the downloadable multiplayer game Kenny vs. Spenny Versusville, produced with the participation of Telefilm Canada. This seemed a little weird. Why did this not come up in any of our searches? Why did nobody involved in the production suggest this? Why is it described as a moving image? Why is it on a CD-ROM when the game never had a physical release? Still, it made some sense, and this looked official. John submitted an inquiry about the item, and it gave him an estimate of 6 to 10 weeks for a reply. For the fourth time, I thought, wow, we're really going to have this game. Meanwhile, I booked travel to New York to see the Kenny vs. Spenny live show. 9 weeks pass. Literally, as I'm tying my shoes on my way out of the door before leaving for New York, I see that John has forwarded us a message. It reads, "This is in response to your request for a copy of Kenny vs. Spenny Versusville 2005-0211. This being a video game available on CD-ROM, Library and Archives Canada has not found a way as of yet to archive this kind of material. It has been described but has not yet been copied, and this might take a while before it can be done. We do apologize that we cannot provide you with a copy at this time. You may try contacting Breakthrough Entertainment via their website and inquire if they could supply you with a copy or if you may be able to download the game. Should you have any questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you for your patience and interest in Library and Archives Canada." I'm floored and confused. Library and Archives Canada has not found a way as of yet to archive this kind of material. We do apologize that we cannot provide you with a copy at this time. John sends a reply that is kinder than I could have been. I greatly appreciate the follow-up regarding this request, and the circumstances regarding its archival status are quite unfortunate yet understandable. I have communicated with Breakthrough Entertainment. CBC.ca, and nearly 30 members of the creative team behind this title in the past, and all avenues have unfortunately been dead ends. Due to the age and obscurity of the game, it hasn't been properly archived by any parties involved, with most not even recalling its existence, thus leading me to fully believe that Library and Archives Canada possesses the only known and accessible copy to this day. If it assists in any future archival efforts for this title by LAC, in my research I have found that the game was primarily stored on a singular .exe file of approximately 85 megabytes in size, rather than it being a game that required a CD for installation, for it was released entirely digitally as a free download. Is it possible to schedule to view this title in person if a digital copy isn't feasible? Thank you for your assistance regarding this matter. John. Meanwhile, I am in New York. I had been in contact with Kenny sporadically since February when I first made my videos, so I gave him a heads up that I was going to be at the show. I won't recount my full experience here, but as a fan of Kenny vs. Spenny, it was really fantastic. I mostly spoke to Kenny, but I had them both sign some Versusville concept art of the Cart Dart supermarket. I also spoke to Kenny about the search. He reassured me that he had a copy still, somewhere. I believe him, but I'm not going to be happy until I see it. That same day, John's gentle response to the archive gets a reaction. Hello, John. Further to your email below, I've gotten in touch with an archivist and our technician once again to see what can be done. I'm not certain what we will be able to do. As soon as I have more information on this, I will notify you. Thank you for your patience. At this point, none of us are optimistic. I'm thinking that my original assumption was right. They might be required to log a work in the archive somehow from a data perspective, but do they actually make sure they're keeping a functional copy? In 2005, when they didn't even have a category for a game and had to classify Versusville as a moving image, did they know how to archive it properly to a disk? After everything we've done, and everyone we spoke to, it appears to have come to this. It's very possible that the only surviving copy of Versusville has been sitting on an aging CD-ROM since it entered a Canadian library in 2005. It's very possible it will never see the light of day.
You must be a Kenny fan. You need to get glasses.
Double kill! Omae wa mou shindeiru. Holy shit!
A few weeks after the last email, the Library Archive Canada responded to say this. I do apologize for taking so long with a status on item Kenny vs. Spenny Versusville 2005-0211. Our technician has managed to find a way to create a copy and would be able to send it to you via Dropbox. However, when discussing this item with our copyright services, it was determined that you would need permission from the copyright owner, and it was suggested to contact the production company again, where one of the donors, Ira Levy, along with Peter Williamson, is executive producer of Kenny and Spenny materials. The producers should be able to provide permission, or at least some information. We could accept an email from Breakthrough stating no objection, which could allow us to provide you with a copy for research purposes. Here below are some of the suggested links to assist you in obtaining permission. We were a little worried about this. Throughout the search, it wasn't clear who actually owned Versusville anymore. It was freely distributed, Kenny fathered it creatively, Mark and DC Studios put in the work, and it was funded in part by the Canadian government. but it had been logged in the archive as owned by Breakthrough Entertainment. You might recognize the names they mention, Ira Levy and Peter Williamson, as executive producers from the credits of just about every episode of Kenny vs. Spenny. These are the guys that actually founded Breakthrough Entertainment, though Peter Williamson left the company a few years ago. There was some debate about what to do. We didn't think that it would be easy to get a hold of Ira, and it would drive us crazy if he didn't respond, or worse, responded just to say no, we couldn't have it. It wouldn't make sense because the game was once freely available, and nobody but us really understands that this game isn't freely available anymore, but if he did... I lobbied for us to get Kenny's permission instead. Kenny was really cool and jumped at the opportunity to help. It would also kinda make sense. Why accept Peter Williamson's permission if he doesn't even work at the company anymore? If former colleagues can grant permission, why can't Kenny? We ended up hedging our bets. I did some sleuthing to find Ira's email, and John asked him for permission. Meanwhile, he also asked the archive if Kenny's okay would suffice. Before they could even respond to the second question, Ira replied the next day to say yes, he would be glad to grant us permission to receive the file. He also didn't seem to care about who had the file at all, in fact. John dutifully forwarded this email onward to the Library and Archives Canada team. On November 4th, we were sent a Dropbox link. For the fifth and final time, I thought, wow, we're really going to have this game. Versusville is great. We occasionally joked about how hard we were working for something that probably wasn't going to be that good, but the game is actually really charming and has some novel ideas. I was impressed with how complex Resident Evil is. Part of that was because I didn't get adequate instructions from the game, but I kind of liked it. It was sort of like solving a puzzle. What's funny is that because we have the design document, we actually know how everything works because it acts as a 120-page user manual. The idea of having reverse health and waste ball or launchers instead of guns in Grave Rave is also pretty novel, even if superficial. The music, credited to Steve is really cool. This is one of my favorite things from Versusville. The most ahead of its time thing in Versusville are these images that appear on the wall in Cart Dart. They're like memes of Kenny and Spenny with black outline, white text impact font. That's pretty standard for memes today, except this game was developed in 2003. We're still baffled by this. It's like when those people claimed they found a Swiss watch in some Egyptian tomb, except real. Even though Versusville doesn't ultimately have much tied to the actual show, Kenny vs. Spenny, the little references to the show that do exist had me smiling. If it isn't obvious, I'm putting a lot of time into this video, but the person who really deserves credit for the find is John. I also want to thank Carson and Metalock a few times over for their work and insight. Unfortunately, one aspect that isn't present in Versusville is the ability to name yourself, log into the leaderboard, or connect to multiplayer. You can play the game modes with bots, but for actual multiplayer as it was originally designed, something would have to be built as the CBC servers are now down. We, Carson in particular, have put a lot of effort into this. In fact, the file they sent doesn't just contain the game. It also contains the original CBC website that we first looked at in the beginning of the video as an archive, except with all the images, audio, and media present. We're currently rehosting all of this at www.versusville.com. We also plan to host the design specification document that was in Mark's backup there too, as well as anything else that would be relevant. Versusville will also be available there, free for anyone to download, as it was originally intended over 15 years ago. On top of that, Carson has produced a new patch to Versusville, which makes a few changes that you can read about in its patch notes. The most significant change in version 2021.1 is that when you install the patch and change your name, your scores and times in any completed games will be sent to the all-new Versusville.com leaderboard, which can be viewed independently from the original. This means that we have a rudimentary re-implementation of servers and multiplayer, even though it's kind of indirect. We're also going to establish some channels in the official Kenny Hots Discord server specifically for Versusville announcements, updates, collaboration, discussion, and scorekeeping. If you're interested in helping to restore multiplayer functionality to Versusville, dig into the code, track down more Kenny vs. Spenny lost media, or just discuss the show in general, you're welcome to join the Discord. I put an invite in the description. You can also email me at this address if you'd like. Thank you for watching.